You're listening to a special version of the Inside Myanmar podcast, which covers the fallout from the military coup and the democratic resistance. During this crisis, we are not only ramping up the production of our podcast episodes, but also our blog and other social media platforms as well. So we invite you to check these out, along with signing up for our regular newsletter. All of our other projects have been paused indefinitely so we can focus entirely on this ongoing emergency. But for now, let's get into the show.
And welcome back. My guest today, once again, will be sharing a perspective that we have not looked at in particular depth throughout our coverage of the crisis. And we are going to be looking at, among other things today, the German perspective, the German media and political perspective on the Myanmar crisis, and potentially more broadly, the European perspective. But before we get into all of that, we will be talking about a fascinating trip that my guest today took to Myanmar itself. So with all that said, Helene, I'd like to thank you very much for joining our program, and I'd like to give you the chance to introduce yourself and your background for our audience.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Helen. I'm a journalist from Germany. I usually work for the German public broadcasting network as a radio journalist, but for the trip I did to Myanmar, I went with some colleagues also from the German broadcasting network, and we are going to produce some films for a younger audience on YouTube for this public broadcasting network about the trip. So my interest in Myanmar is more a private one. I have some friends from and in Myanmar, and so I'm interested in the region, in the country, in the conflict, and I was reading a lot about it during the past years, and so this cooperation between me and those experienced war reporters happened.
Excellent. And I think the broader theme is going to be shining through this episode, talking about the importance of getting that information out and trying to reach an audience that maybe has not yet been all that impacted and all that aware of the ongoing crisis. So with all that said, you said you yourself, am I correct? You said you are not a war reporter by trade.
Yeah, that's true. I usually work for the local radio station, and I haven't been to any war areas before this.
And so I'm just curious, like on the internal side of things, how does that how does that happen? Is there a particular process? Is there particular training that you had to undergo? Or did you just put your hand up and say, I really care about this issue and I want to be on the ground so I can see it for myself and so that I can report on this? What was the process that took you from someone who stays sort of away from conflict zones to someone who actually traveled to one?
Yeah, I think there are two main aspects. So in my private life, I'm in contact with a lot of garment workers, unions around the world, and I have visited Bangladesh or northern Sri Lanka, which I would say is obviously not a war zone, but still a conflict zone. So this is where I have already been to areas that are not very touristy before. And then when I was talking to my colleagues who are experienced war reporters, we obviously prepared for a long time. So it was months before that. So we were talking to the people on the ground, to the locals, how the situation is and how it's developing. And yes, I had to do a certain training, which is mostly for the insurance, because there are insurances for war reporters, but then you have to do this certain security training. It's called HEAT, Hostile Environment Awareness Training, where you learn about first aid, about how to deal with fires. Also, if a car is on fire, or how to change a tire, even if you're not in a city with all the right equipment, but also how to act if you're in a checkpoint. So this is the training I had to do before I could go.
It's really interesting stuff, actually, because we don't see much of the we would say in English how the sausage is made. We don't necessarily understand how a war correspondent is created. So knowing that there is this process to go through is really interesting. So
Yeah,
then,
they are also sorry, they are also faking a hostage. You're getting taken hostage during this training too. So
really,
this is yeah. They train you a few days before that, always with like only shorter amounts of time where they fake an attack or something, and then at some point they come and take you hostage for a few hours, and you have a this thing above your head so you can't see anything, and tied hands, and they will interrogate you and stuff like that.
it sounds very
But there's
involved.
yeah, but there's also a psychologist there, so that's I think an important aspect, that you can always leave the scenery, and
Yeah.
there's always someone who will take care of you.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it's pretty important to have that safety net. Um, but then, of course, ultimately, I mean, the end of this is you go to Myanmar and you don't have that safety net there. You don't have a psychologist on hand, and you know that if you do get taken hostage, it's for real. So I'm always curious to know, like, as you're preparing to cross into the country, and you're thinking, okay, I'm currently in a country where I am, you know, residing legally with my visa and I have legal protections and people know where I am, and I'm about to move into an area that is a conflict zone where there are landmines and drone strikes and artillery, and people are not going to know where I am. My phone's probably not going to work, and I'm definitely not, going to be welcomed by the regime. What's going through your mind as you're preparing for this? Are you apprehensive? Are you second guessing your choices, or are you just so focused on the process and the checklist that you don't even think about it?
Yes, I do. I do think about it a lot. And the thing is, as I said, I'm not a war reporter. And this was something where I was asking myself constantly, why do I do it, and what do I do it for? So for me, it was very important, because I think I'm not only taking a risk for myself. So also the people who are welcoming me, the people from the camp, are taking a risk. And I always wanted to make sure, I don't know if I can fully do that, but at least for myself, ask myself, um, is it necessary to go? And I decided, yes, I think there are reports in Germany on this conflict, but not, as I see it, enough. At the moment, I mean, I do appreciate the work all war reporters are doing, but at the moment, I would not go to Ukraine or Israel, because there are a lot of reporters. So
Hmm.
I always wanted to make sure that I see some kind of sense in it. So
Yeah.
we were planning the trip for November, December last year, and we had to postpone it. And after that, after Operation 1027, the situation changed very much. And for a while, there were a lot of journalists who were covering the situation. And then I was like, okay, should I still do it? But then the conscription law came and the reports were declining again. And then I said, yes, I think should still do it. And I was preparing for this for a long time. And I do think that I know a little bit about the country and the conflict. And I think it was the right decision. But this is something that I asked myself over and over again, like every week, that I was thinking, okay, does it still make sense? And I think I had a lot of trust to the people who I was planning it with on the ground, the locals, because these were my contacts. Or not all of them, but some of them I knew before, and I trust them a lot. So I was thinking, if they say it's possible, I will go with it. And
Mm.
then I wouldn't, I try to not think too much about how it is if something happens. Yeah, I know something can happen and I'm reflecting on that, but everything else I think is a training of mind control.
Yeah.
And that's also what we were learning in this heat program. Yeah, that they were always saying the worst is if you don't accept things. So I tried to accept every situation that made me nervous, like waiting for a long time. It's sometimes just waiting and you don't know what's going to happen and you just have to accept that. And or just it's easy to say, but I tried to prepare for that, to just accept what's happening and that I cannot control everything.
Mm. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And so, time-wise, when did this happen? Because you mentioned the conscription law, if I remember correctly, that came into effect in February of this year. Um, we're currently recording in April, so this trip would have been quite recent.
Yeah, the trip was in the end of March. We were there end of March, and I came back, I think, 1st of April, something
Wow.
like that, maybe 30 March. Yeah, so it's just 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty incredible. So it must be very fresh in your mind. So let's talk about the actual content of the trip. So you were in the East. You get across the country, and if I remember correctly, you said you were embedded with or not embedded with, but you were interacting with PDF groups, and going to civilian villages. You didn't come into contact with the military at all, did you?
Yeah, no, I did not come in contact with any military checkpoint. We got pretty close, I think, but I was in a PDF camp.
Mm.
And we also visited other camps, mostly a training camp where new recruits arrived just 10 days ago. So we were also talking to them.
Mm.
So the conscription law was quite present. And yeah, my main interaction was with the PDF soldiers and the new recruits.
So it seems almost ironic, but would you say that one of the effects of the conscription law has been to drive higher levels of recruitment for the PDF?
Yes, I would definitely say that because most of them said that themselves because
Wow.
they say the whole population, more or less the whole population, is on the side of the PDF and not on the side of the military. But maybe not everyone wants to fight. But when you don't have a choice, many people say, okay, if I have to fight, if I don't have a choice, then I'll go to the other side.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. So you say you were in the PDF camp. Can you just describe to us what what is a PDF camp? Like, what are we? How big are they? What is life like? What is the rhythm of life? What is the activity going on there? What were you doing? Because you have 24 hours in a day to fill, um, and I'm sure you weren't filming every second of it. Like, what is life like in a camp?
um, I mean, I have seen this one camp and visited others, so I really don't know if it's everywhere the same. But the camp I visited was it changed during the time I was there because the commander wasn't there the whole time, I think. So usually they start the day with lining up. They didn't do that every day when I was there, but as far as I understood, they usually do that when the commander is there. They are lining up in the morning before breakfast, and they are shouting or chanting something, which was more or less like my sole purpose is to protect the civilians, to remind
Mm.
themselves of why they are there. After that, there's breakfast, and then they have some duties like cleaning the camp, cleaning the weapons, things like that. And then I think the rhythm with us was maybe a little bit different because we then went to visit the training camp for the new recruits, and we always had to take soldiers with us. So we were not allowed to leave the car during the trip. And we always had to sit inside the car, and they were all pickups, and on the back there were always at least 2 or 3 soldiers coming with us, so they had the purpose to go with us and to
Mm.
protect us during that time. And in the training camp they were just getting started. They did not have even the bamboo huts yet,
Mm.
because also the PDF camp itself, it's not like built houses, it's bamboo huts. They built themselves in the jungle because, as you said, there's always the danger of airstrikes, and you don't have these
Are you
systems
there?
that are like sirens or any warnings or anything. Yeah, so in the training camp, they were just getting started, so they did not have any bamboo huts yet, as they have in the PDF camp, because also in the PDF camp you don't have like real houses. You have bamboo huts. It's in the jungle because you don't have like sirens or any warnings if there's an airstrike or anything. So the main thing why they are protected from airstrikes is that it's hidden, that the junta doesn't know where the camps are. So the PDF camp, in the PDF camp, we were sleeping in bamboo huts, and in the new recruits camp, they were just getting started and preparing to build the bamboo huts. They were sleeping in hammocks in the jungle, and that was their main task for those days that we were staying there preparing, because they also had to build up their own shovels and preparing the sticks, the bamboo sticks. So that was mainly was happening. Yeah, lining up, talking about what they are doing there, what their purpose is, preparing food, obviously, because it's also an important task that they have enough food. They get donations from the civilians around, as far as I understood, to have enough food, and preparing that and building up the camp.
Okay, so most of the activity is it seems like it's more your maintenance, construction, and just labor. Basically,
Yeah,
seems to be the yeah.
yeah.
Okay, it's really interesting. And did you speak to the civilians themselves as well, or were you separated from them?
Yeah, we did not speak to civilians. As I said, we were not allowed to leave the car when we were going from one place to the other, because white people in that area are always suspicious, and you
Mm,
never know if there's any informant between them. So they made sure that usually people did not see us because they don't know what we are doing there.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so, yes, but I presume that you were able to conduct some sort of interviews with the PDF while you were staying with them.
Yes, yes, sure. I talked to a lot of people.
One would hope. So the question then comes like, what were you getting from the PDF themselves? Like, what were they saying? What was their perspective on the conflict? Their perspective on the PDF as an organization? What what were the themes that you were hearing from them?
There are, I think, two things that I found. most interesting. On the one hand, these are not like they have not been trained soldiers before, like you have in other war zones or conflicts where you have an army anyway and they start fighting when a war starts. So all those people had different hopes and dreams and jobs before that, and never thought of fighting with guns for their lives. So this was the one thing that was special to me, because they were usually saying, my motivation is to protect the civilians because the junta kills civilians. That was what I heard over and over again. Um, that the junta is just killing elderly women, children, and this is something that motivated people like them who were students or just workers. Or I met a graphic designer, he was a graphic designer before the coup, who are fighting because they just see how cruel the junta acts and that they really want to protect the civilians from that. So this was the one thing. The other thing was that I think they were quite professional, and we were asking them, how do you do that? There is at least no official support from other states for the resistance armies. So how do you get this training? How can you act so professional, even if there's a lack of everything? They don't have enough weapons. They don't have the same weapons. They have different rifles. They don't have enough cars and stuff like that. But to us, it seemed that they were acting quite professional, and they said that they get trained from the ethnic minority groups, the EROs. And I think that I would like to talk to a speaker of the Karen or any other group if they would confirm that. But to me, it seemed that they are really appreciating where they are and where they get the support from, because we were in a Karen area, and they really appreciate that they get trained by those people who are fighting already for decades in the jungle, so they have all the knowledge. And as far as I understand, this was not the case during the past decades, even under military dictatorship, that there was so much cooperation and appreciation for each other. And at least this is the impression that I got, that they do know where they are, where they get their training from, and that that is something that I find very important if we are thinking and talking about what is going to happen, even if the junta is defeated, because there are so many different groups, so many different interests in this conflict. How are they going on if the junta is defeated? And if they are already building up networks between those groups, and starting the negotiations already now, not only the fighting. And if the Burmese people are appreciating the ethnic minority groups who are fighting already for decades, I think it's a good start. And this is something that really came up more than one time.
Mm, absolutely. And I think that's it's one of the themes that that we've seen. There's one person that we're talking to. I don't know whether the episode is. I can't remember whether we've actually recorded yet or not. But one person that we're talking to who was embedded in Chinland. One person we're talking to who was embedded in Karenni State. The narrative of cooperation between different resistance groups is just a consistent theme that we are seeing. And you are quite right to say that this is unusual, that there was not this level of cooperation between anti-military and anti-dictatorship groups before the coup. This has really been a galvanizing point that has brought together. Like, ironically, the military, who has deliberately fostered mistrust between different groups and factionalism across the country as a way to justify its continued existence has, in fact, inadvertently created unity and solidarity and a new national identity through the coup. It's a really fascinating thing to see, and I'm frankly I'm a little bit jealous that you get to have this firsthand. Um, it must be such a just a unique experience to have had.
Yeah, I I can confirm that. Yeah, it was.
I mean, it's brilliant. But the other one as well is I want to talk about the morale because you're talking about all these people who had lives and careers and they had jobs and they had prospects and dreams, and they choose to give that up so that they can join the PDF, they can join the revolution and try to liberate the country from the military. But what was their outlook? Because it's one thing to say this is the best thing that I can do, or other people who are just saying, well, if I have to fight, as you say, if I have to fight because this conscription law is coming into effect, I may as well fight on the revolution side. But how did they feel about their chances of success?
I think quite good at the moment. So the interesting thing was that, I mean, I was in the jungle with people who had, as you said, lives before, who were more or less forced to fight. Um, and I didn't see devastation or much um, disappointment in life. I had the impression that the morale was quite high, and I think this is there are two aspects why this might be. On the one hand, um, they are gaining ground. I mean, I say they, but it's the like since Operation 1027 and the Three Brotherhood Alliance, there are always reports on that the anti-junta movement gains ground. And I think this is something which is really empowering for them. They know that they have good chances at the moment because the morale for the junta soldiers is very low. I mean, if you compare it, the junta has the support of China, Russia, uh, also Iran, and they have all the money that they can have because they are controlling the economy in the country and the oil and gas industry. But still, as I always hear it, they don't have the soldiers anymore, and this is
Hmm.
the reason for the conscription law, because the soldiers just don't want to shoot their own people anymore. And on the other hand, you have the PDF and the ethnic groups who are fighting and who don't have airplanes
Yeah.
and not the same equipment, but still they have a very high morale because they say, okay, we don't want the civilians to get killed. And so they are very motivated. They are fighting for their future and they are connected now, what they haven't been before 2011. Under the other military dictatorships, they did not have the connection. Within each other. They can communicate with other parts of the country. They know what's happening somewhere else. And so this is also motivating, I think, if they see we are not isolated here. There's a big movement around the country and there are successes somewhere else. So I had the impression they are very empowered.
Okay. That's really interesting to hear. I would say it's even better than you portray it in some ways. Specifically, when you say that the junta have the support of China and Russia and Iran and things like this, some of the information that we've been receiving lately is that that support is greatly diminished.
Mhm,
China is very angry because their economic interests are not being fulfilled. They haven't
mhm,
been able to receive copper. They haven't been able to receive nickel, dysprosium, terbium, jade, and so on. Plus, what is it, like 120,000 predominantly Chinese um, citizens are being kept as slaves in the scam centers, and China's very angry about this. Russia's busy in Ukraine. Iran seems to be, busy focused on Israel and the Middle Eastern conflict. So the friends that the junta has are sort of walking away from them because they have other things to do, or because the junta is not good for business, and the money is drying up as well, with more and more sanctions being put in place that are actually impactful and actually do cut the junta off from major sources of revenue. So if anything, it seems like the revolution would have even more cause to be optimistic
Mhm.
than even that. And you seem to be saying that the attitudes are good. And this was, just to clarify, Myawaddy was just recently liberated in Karen. You were there before this happened.
Yeah, just a few days. I was still in Southeast Asia when I heard the news. Yeah, it was just a few days after I came back.
So it's really interesting. There's like, yes, so Operation 1027, which you mentioned, obviously has a very positive effect on morale. Operation 0307, which is the KIA's counteroffensive in Kachin, obviously again brings positive morale. But you were saying morale was already high before the liberation of Myawaddy. So presumably, right now, things in Karen would be even more optimistic than when you were there. Which would be difficult to imagine, but to see it. So that trip that you took, it sounds absolutely fascinating, and it's a fascinating little glimpse into the PDF and how the PDF operate. I'm wondering, did you interact at all with ethnic armed organizations, or were you only interacting with PDF?
No, I was only interacting with PDF. That's why I said before I would really like to talk to at least those Kareni or a Karen spokesperson, or from any other state, Shan or Rakhine, to confirm my impressions. But I mean, I was there for 4 days, which before I went, I thought that's quite a long time if I'm only in one camp. And now I think it's limited time and I have so
Mm.
many more questions. So,
Yes.
yeah, so I think my research is not really done yet because I'm still interested in other perspectives and I still have a lot of questions left.
I mean, I think that's kind of the sign of good research. If you have a research question and you investigate and you answer your research question and you go home, you probably didn't do very good research. Good research ends with even more questions than you started with. Um, that's always the case. But okay, so all good things must come to an end, and you fly back to Germany with all these extra questions that you haven't been able to
Hmm.
answer. But you fly back to Germany. You've investigated as much as you can. You've done your interviews. I presume you've gathered together a lot of media that you say you're producing for YouTube content and things like this. My question then is, when you fly back to Germany, other than the psychological decompression of returning from a conflict zone,
Hmm.
what is their reaction within the media space? Because you're working in the media space. So here they have someone who's just come back from a conflict zone. You've been talking to what essentially we might regard in the West as rebel fighters. And how is this being treated? Is this being treated as a priority within the media organizations you're working for? Or do you find that even with all the work that you've done, it's not quite getting the traction and the attention that you think it should?
Yeah, I think it's not getting the attention that it should. So, you know, Ukraine is so much closer to Germany, and also the Middle East is not only closer, but there are so many more strings to the Middle East that these conflicts are have a much higher priority in the media. And I'm not saying that there are no reports on what's happening in Myanmar, but even if there are the reports on what's happening, I have the impression that many people, even that I know privately, they don't really realize what the situation in Myanmar is, even if it's in the news, because they don't really know, okay, where is this country, what's happening
Mm.
there, and if there's a report on, oh, they gained Miyawadi, they don't know what that means, and the reports are usually not long enough in the news to explain all of this. And I mean, there is a big newspaper in Germany who's constantly reporting on that, but on page 3 or something. So I'm not sure, but how much war can you process? Um,
Yes.
so there is already so much going on, which is much closer to us. So it's kind of frustrating because, yeah, I think the priority is not really there. Everything else is more important. And now Israel has attacked, or has his attacks with Iran, which is just happening now and which is um, very up to date. So it's very hard to get in between those reports, I would say.
And I kind of understand that. Are you almost saying that there's an element of audience fatigue or information overload, that you just can't keep feeding people information about conflicts around the world? Or do you think that there is a way that this story could be communicated and could engage with an audience, that is not going to overload them?
I think it's difficult because, yes, I do think there is this overload, and I'm not sure how to work with that. But as I said, we are producing a content for YouTube because we have, from the German Public Broadcasting Network, we have a format for a younger audience. And this is basically on YouTube. And I think it can be a good way to address a younger audience because the people in the PDF camps are very young, and you can identify with them, with their lives they had before. And the conscription law, the funny thing, funny in not as the usual sense, in Germany, it's discussed now at the same time. Obviously, it does not have the same effect on the younger people as in Myanmar, but at least there is some point of identification that they are discussing a conscription law, that they had different lives before, and maybe this is one, or this is a point where I try to go in
Mm.
and tell the story from this perspective so they can identify with that.
So this is something that I'm curious about, because I was quite I was a little bit shocked, out here. So I'm based in Australia at the moment, and there are quite a few Myanmar citizens in Australia, and there was in fact a an immigration firm who were advertising on social media specifically in response to the conscription law, trying to advertise to Myanmar people saying, "Hey, if you are trying to seek asylum as a result of the conscription law, then contact us. We can help you to process this." That in and of itself was not unusual. What was unusual or disappointing was the comment section. People who don't know anything about Myanmar were saying, well, you shouldn't try to leave your country just because there's a conscription law. You should serve in the military. You should do your national duty, da da da. And this is in Australia, a country that does not have military service. And I don't like that. I believe there was conscription in Australia in World War II. I think there may even have been conscription in Vietnam, although I'm not 100% on that. But there after that, there has not been any military service. I do know that in Germany there is a system of national service, which can be military or it can be civil service. Does that, the presence of that system, does that impact the way people react to this news of, oh, there's a conscription law in Myanmar?
It's a bit more difficult because we had the conscription for a long time. Only a few years ago, they changed that.
Okay.
And then you could say, no, I don't want to go to the military. I want to do civil service. It was only for boys, but so I did not have to deal with that. But when I was about 18 to 20, all the boys in my surroundings had to decide, okay, am I going to the military, or am I doing some kind of civil service? But as a default, they had to go to the military. If they don't want that, they had to apply, and then they could change that to civil service. And then a few years ago, they changed that. And at the moment, there is no, you don't have to do any of that, but they are discussing that now again because of the war in Ukraine and the situation with Russia and stuff like that. So that's the situation.
Okay, so it's all like the idea of conscription is already present in the minds of German audiences.
Yeah.
That would be the yeah. So
Yeah.
then, so when you talk about the Myanmar conscription law, does it? How should I put this? Like, is it a story that you can tell and have people sympathize with the Myanmar situation, or is it a story that people will automatically flip from a Myanmar situation and bring the conversation back to the German domestic conscription discussion?
Hard to tell.
Mm,
I hope that it's more a point of identification. But yeah, I think it's very hard to tell because I don't really know yet, and I think it might be very different in no depending on who you are talking to.
okay.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah. So then, more broadly speaking, then, do you think that there is going to be any way to get the Myanmar story just across to German audiences? Because it sounds like there's not much um, going on currently. Like I, from our perspective, I think we sort of think of the Germans, or at least I do, and I know many people in the English speaking world think of the Germans as generally being more invested in these international stories. And definitely when you look at the productions of things like Deutsche Welle, who do English language productions covering a lot of different conflicts and a lot of different things around the world, the impression we get is that a German audience is much more interested in foreign affairs and conflicts that are not necessarily directly related to German interests. But you seem to be saying that that's not necessarily the case. So is there any way to overcome these hurdles, do you think?
yeah, hard to say. So it's interesting that you mentioned Deutsche Welle because I think it is very interesting what they are doing, but it's not that um, perceived. Is that the right word? There's not such a big audience in Germany. It's
Mm,
more the international audience that they are speaking to, and I also think that this also differs a lot with the interest in different parts of the world. So we have a rise of the right wing parties, and I think they are mostly interested in conflicts like with Russia or something where they have some kind of interest in this field. And there is this other group, I would say, in Germany where the more or less more liberal left intellectuals who are very interested in what's happening around the world. But still, I think the focus usually is in where the ties are and what affects us the most. And I think Myanmar is geostrategically not very much connected to Germany. And something like the oil and gas industry, who's working in Myanmar, that is something which is very far away because it's not like you go to a store and you decide, okay, do I buy here or not because I know where they are producing things. Oil and gas is more or less the second line. Yeah, you don't see that every day, even if there are companies who use this for their production, and then you profit from that or you benefit from that. So that's so much more complex, the supply chain, that the people don't really feel connected to this region. And I think it is difficult to really um, uh, to really place this topic in the media or in the public consciousness.
Mm. But it's because this comes into the other thing that we saw coming from Germany, that I think for many other countries in the West has become, uh, I would say, very successful PR in Germany. That is, if we go back about 10 years, we look at the period around the Arab Spring and then the subsequent sort of destabilization in many countries in the Middle East and the rise of ISIS. We saw Germany take a very leading role within Europe with regards to welcoming refugees, resettling refugees. And we saw scenes in Germany of, the football fans who you would naturally think of as more hostile to migration. In many other countries, they would be very hostile to migration. Even they were coming out in support of refugees. So the image that Germany has cultivated very successfully, I would say very deservedly, uh, through the 21st century is of a country that is very invested in humanitarian causes and is very invested in helping people who are fleeing persecution and fleeing oppression. Um, but that one would presume would translate to having a greater interest in Myanmar and a greater interest in helping. And yet, talking to you, it seems as though Germany is not really in that position, at least when it comes to Myanmar, is not all that interested in taking up a humanitarian cause just for the sake of taking up a humanitarian cause. Can you sort of explain like why this is?
Yeah, I think the picture that you were just drawing um, is just one picture of a whole, I'd say, mosaic. Yeah. So there were those people who were welcoming refugees, and it was very public, but it was on the one hand only a very short period of time. It changed when there were coming more and more and more refugees over the years. And in the beginning, it was very easy. Yeah, you could just hold the banner at a football match, or you could just go and donate your old clothes, and then you felt you have done something for humanity. um, but in the long run, a lot has changed because some difficulties arose. Yeah, where are they all living? We have I'd say, a housing crisis, at least in the urban areas. We don't have enough space that is affordable, which is a different problem. I wouldn't say there are too many refugees, but this is the short answer that many people would give to this problem. And I think it's much more complex. It does not have to be a shortage of housing, but it's just too expensive, and that has something to do with the market. But this is one side of the story, and the other thing is that Germany is in the middle of other European countries, and it's more easy for them to say, yes, sure, come here, because they are not coming. I mean, there are refugees coming, but we don't have the same problems like Italy or Greece, who are facing much more difficulties because they don't get the support from other countries who are far away from the borders of Europe. And these are two aspects, I think, that make the picture a little bit more complex. And yeah, so the right, as I said, the right wing is also rising. So I wouldn't say that Germany as a whole is very interested in humanitarian or human rights movements. Of course, there are people in Germany who are interested. There are others who have a very different agenda. And everything is changing over this period of time and how the whole situation is developing. And that's very, very complex.
Hmm. So long story short, you're basically saying that Germany has experienced what many countries and what many individuals experience when you throw yourself into something that's good, but when the reality hits of the actual cost of effort and time and other ancillary things, you start to cool your attitude towards
Yeah,
what you were doing. Yeah.
yeah,
Which is perhaps not surprising. It's not unique to the German context. It's just very unfortunate that this
yeah.
change is happening right now, and that's okay. And that's interesting. And so, really, because what it is from my perspective, we've been doing Inside Myanmar for a while. I've been working on this podcast for maybe 2.5 years now, and in that time, the idea of an information campaign and how to successfully spread the necessary information has been a consistent question, and nobody really has a good answer to this. But it's in these areas of silence and areas of darkness where the worst things can happen, because if no one's looking and nobody's asking any questions and nobody cares, you can get away with any crimes. And that's why it's so important to make people all over the world invested in this crisis, and not just Myanmar. Obviously, there are crises around the world that people need to be aware of and need to be invested in so that we can put pressure on them. I think a very wonderful example of this would be South Africa.
Mhm,
International pressure on South Africa was actually instrumental in bringing about an end to apartheid. Um,
mhm,
and so that's why we need to have all the international eyes on Myanmar. And I work with indirectly media from Europe, from different countries, and there are so many PDF groups. There are so many, um, EAOs. There are so many people working for the revolution, for the National Unity Government, whoever, who are standing in line, saying like, please, like, we'll do interviews. We'll take you around the country. We'll sneak you across the border. We will do all these things. We are happy to do these things if you can spread this message. It seems mostly to be difficulty in getting media who are interested, and those media, when I do talk to them, the journalists, often what I hear from them is saying, well, I want to. I would love to. I'm very passionate about this. I'm familiar with the Myanmar conflict, all this, but my company is not willing to pay for it. My editor is not willing to give me the permission for it. Insurance is not willing to cover it. And that indicates that those media houses do not view the Myanmar crisis as significant enough a story that it will bring in that audience interest that will make it worthwhile for them to take the risk. Um, so ultimately, what I want to ask you is: do you think that you have any ideas on what can be done to foster that engagement, to foster that investment, to foster that interest, so that we have a situation where the journalists who want to cover the conflict can cover it because the media houses do see the value in doing it because the audience is interested in knowing what's happening? Do you know how we can build those bridges?
If I would only knew that. So I have the same impression, unfortunately, what you described. And yeah, if I only had an answer to that, I mean, I'm not sure how to change this information crisis on the Myanmar issue. I would just say never stop trying. And I think in the end, that's what I did or what I tried to, because the people I was going with to this camp, I'm usually not working with, and I tried so many other offers before that, and they were all rejected. So I wouldn't say I can change the problem. I can only try to do my part and do best as I can to inform some people. And I think it's more on on a smaller scale. I don't know how to change that in the big picture.
Fair enough. I mean, I think you're doing a very admirable job as it is by actually going into the country, talking to the people, and trying to get their stories out there. And I think, especially the fact that you plan to put it up on something like YouTube is going to make it particularly accessible, much more readily shareable. I think many in the legacy media have not done a particularly good job of exploiting the platforms that are more popular and are more easily accessible, because of course if you're using somebody else's platform, you don't retain as much control over what you get. You don't, your analytics are not going to be as clear, the money is going to be more complicated, but they are very accessible tools. So I think you and your team are definitely making a very powerful, very positive contribution. The big question then comes is like, how can we make sure that the recipients of that message are actually listening and are focused and are invested in continuing to get updates about what's going on in Myanmar? And the only hope that I have at the moment is that with the success of 1027, with the success of 0307, with the success of the current capturing KNU, so the KNU capturing Myawaddy, with again, there's a different interview about that on the horizon, with the successes that we've seen in Karenni State. I'm hoping that the Myanmar crisis is not going to be another story of depression and sadness and, oh, how terrible is the world, but rather is going to start being told and shared as a story of hope and optimism and uplift, saying, rather, instead of saying, well, here's a terrible military dictatorship that's oppressing the people, we will now start telling the story, here is a group of people that managed to overthrow an oppressive military dictatorship. Which is, it sounds very different, and it appeals to an audience who are already very, I think, weary and tired of hearing about conflict after conflict after conflict, and they're looking for a little bit of optimism. And I'm very much hoping that we can start to tell the Myanmar conflict in these optimistic, appealing terms in the near future.
And not only overthrowing the military, yeah, we have seen in the Arab Spring that they were overthrowing a dictatorship, but after that, nothing really developed into a better direction. And that this is something that I'm interested in now, and what I was saying before, and that I would like to ask also other spokespersons from other groups or from ethnic minority groups, if they are really already working on these strong ties among all these different interest groups and building up a federal democracy already before the junta is defeated, or already working on that before and working on administrative structures in the freed areas, then this is something special. And this would be very interesting if you're looking at other conflicts, because this is something I don't really remember where this happened before. I think it's a common problem that there are many people who have the same enemy and defeat this enemy, but after that they don't know how to go forward. And if this is what I'm hearing now, that there are so many efforts on this process already, and if this is really working, then this is also a very interesting story, and not only the victory over the junta, because the very challenging process will begin after that.
Absolutely. And I think this has been a conversation we've had on our side, as well. This question of, but what do we do after victory? What do we do after the conflict? And the answer I get given is like, well, after the conflict, we have even more work to do.
Mhm.
Even for our role as media, if you'll permit Inside Myanmar to label itself as media. Um, After the conflict, there'll be so much work to do and so many conversations to have, so many people who need to have their voices spread in the long, complicated process of forming a nation, forming a stable democracy, a stable federal system. There will be much, but at the very least, we can say that in Myanmar we actually have a plan. There is the roadmap for democracy. There is already a plan in the works for how to tackle that difficult road. And as you said, in the Arab Spring, I mean, we saw what we would say out of the frying pan into the fire. In some cases, we saw the installation of military dictatorships after the governments were taken down,
Hmm.
and it's just a perpetual cycle of oppression, really. And yeah, Myanmar, I think, does stand out as having possibly the best shot of not only liberating itself from military dictatorship, but yeah, as you say, establishing a lasting, democratic system. And it just boggles my mind that we don't have more people who are deeply invested in this. It's such an incredible case study, such an incredible story, such an incredible conflict, which represents, I believe, a radical turning point where we say, like, no, you don't need Western intervention, you don't need the United Nations, you don't need the EU, you don't need the US, you don't need these things. You can overthrow a dictatorship by yourself, and you can result in a stable democracy. Or hopefully that's what we're going to be seeing very, very soon. uh, if this succeeds, or when this succeeds, I think it's permanently going to change the ways that we look at conflict, the way that we look at international relations, and I think it's going to have flow-on effects to all of the governments around the world that depend on their populations being broken down and depressed and pessimistic about their chances of ever seeing freedom, because it will remind them that at the end of the day, if you do come together and you do unify against this government, you can succeed. There are more of you than there are of them. And when that message gets out, it is terrifying to dictatorships. So again, I'm just very shocked that we don't have more people who are following this,
Hmm.
second by second by second.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. We just have to hope that the message gets out there in some way, in some shape.
Yeah, and you're
And,
doing your part with this podcast, so.
slowly, inch by inch. Um, but then the question that becomes, on your end, are you planning at some point to return?
Yeah, I'm planning to return when the junta is defeated to celebrate on the streets. Latest, yeah. No, there are no other plans for now, but still, I will stay invested and I will stay interested. And as I said, I have all these personal contacts and also the union
Mm,
contacts, and this is what I said before. In my private life, not in my journalist life, I have these connections to the unions from Myanmar, and we already had those contacts before the coup. And when the coup happened, and they had to go underground, or they were becoming illegal, and they were very invested in the CDM movement, we were already supporting them. So these are ties that are, I think, hopefully strong enough, but we already have them for like more than 3 years now. And so even if I'm not crossing the border again very soon, I will most likely keep in touch with the people and maybe meet them soon again, in exile at least.
mm. I mean, yeah, I have to agree. I'm in a very, very similar situation with that myself. But that dream of going back and celebrating in Yangon, um, with the people who were fighting, with the people who fled, whose lives were turned upside down. Uh, that it's a comforting dream. It's a
Hmm.
comforting thought. It keeps you going. And my hope is like, okay, it's 2024 now. Let's say the war ends in 2024, as there have been some analysts who are saying that it will. Let's say the war ends, 2025, 2026. What if we go forward to 2030 or 2035? Can we sit in Yangon and look back and say things are actually better now because the coup happened and because we were able to get rid of the military? Things are better now than they would have been if the military just continued to control the majority of the economy and control, the government and control the budget and limit the amount of political progress that could occur. That's everything happening now is terrible. But if it leads to a country that is better off because it managed to completely free itself of this disease, of this corrupted and suppressive military, then we could argue that it is worthwhile. It is in the whole good for the country that it has come to a head in this way, and that there will be an actual conflict to completely get rid of the military. But all of this is conjecture. We don't know what will happen, but we do know that what is happening now is you're going to be making your documentary, going to be sharing that, and please do send that to us, and we will make sure that our audience, if you have something uploaded, we will link it underneath this episode so our audience can find it and they can view it. I assume that the content will be in German. Yes?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
But you never know.
Yeah.
We have German listeners as well. So we will link the content if you have something ready to go. But in the meantime, I do want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing the story. And I really hope that we can find ways that get this story out and get the German audience and all audiences around the world to be much more engaged on this issue.
Yeah. I think it's what we were discussing just right before. Be interested in what's happening, because it might become a good example in the future, because I do think there is much more to this conflict, and with all the negotiations that are happening in the background and not only the fighting, it's very interesting what's happening there and how they are trying to prepare for federal democracy among so many different groups that are invested in this conflict and have different interests. And I do think this is a very special thing about this conflict, and so it's really worth to be informed or get informed about what's happening there.
We'd like to take this time to thank our generous supporters who have already given. We simply could not continue to provide you with this content and information without the wonderful support of generous donors, listeners, and friends like you. Each episode helps in providing access to one more voice, one more perspective, one more insight. Every donation of any size is greatly appreciated and helps us continue this mission. We greatly appreciate your generosity, which allows us to maintain this platform. Thank you. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.